Well, what do you know? It's a Friday night, 6:15.
Yeah, we're pretty good tonight.
Yeah, I should have hit record 15 minutes ago because we were having a great conversations about triathlon anyhow, but
Yeah, that's how it always happens. But yeah, it's Friday night. We're actually doing a talk, and awesome stuff on Wednesday that we had a midweek
oh,
talk
yeah,
with Ron, and I got a lot of little gems out of that.
yeah,
And then yeah, we get it back and talk again, and we're just talking how we have one more week left of summer school
yeah.
each, so maybe things are going to kind of calm down and get back to normal.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're right. The Wednesday session with Ron was great. And I'll tell you, we are really blessed in our Las Vegas community to have so many good experts in
Yep.
our area in lots of different fields. And so, yeah, that's just a lot of fun to be able to connect. And you know, I hope people see the different expertise because sometimes it's easy to look across the fence and think that grass is greener somewhere else. But we really have some top-notch people
Agreed.
here in town.
Well, and we talked about this before, and top-notch training opportunities here.
Yeah, yeah,
We've got good pools, we've got great roads to ride on, great places to run. And I know it's a little hot. I mean, we were talking off air, but today was the first day I've commuted in a while, and man, it was hot. I'm not gonna lie on the way home, but on the way in, I got a ride in the rain, which I actually
yeah,
haven't done in a long time, and I
yeah.
was loving it. I was like, man, I was getting poured on, but it was like 90 degrees and getting poured on. I was like, this is great.
Yeah.
um it was a spectacular commute in this morning. Not so
Yeah.
spectacular coming home in the air dryer,
It
or
was
air fryer we're going to call it.
yeah, air fryer. Yeah, it was humid today and I got caught in the rain, but not like rain. It was drizzling and it was just so cool. It was nice. It's funny, I was just back east last week and we big rainstorm back east. No one says anything. No one posts anything. And I was kidding with my brother. I said, well, when it rains in Vegas, we're all posting on Facebook. We take pictures of it. We take video. Look at the rain, and it's just so because we hardly ever get any of it here. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a special day when that does happen.
Yep, it was good. Well, John, we thought about a good topic today, and we thought about our topic today, and we thought about doing 70.3 race day
Yeah.
nutrition.
Mhm.
And I think that this is an interesting one. I think a lot of people are dialed in with their short distance
Mhm.
nutrition. And I think for the most part, people are pretty dialed in with their long course nutrition.
Mhm.
But and people I've been talking to, there's still a lot of struggling with the 70.3 nutrition.
Yeah.
And it's tough, right? Because it's kind of in that middle range of, you can get away with maybe a little bit less and take a gamble.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I don't know. To me, it's still a little bit of a mystery for people getting that distance right. I don't know what your experiences are with nutrition on 70.3s.
No, you're spot on with that. I mean, a sprint you can make some mistakes. I mean, but the sprint the only mistake that you would be making is if you take too much in.
Yeah.
The Olympic, you can still make a little bit of mistake here and there on nutrition and still be okay. And again, be on the light side there. Full Ironman, oh boy, there if you make a mistake, you really pay the price.
Yep.
And that's hard. But the 70.3 is, you're right, it's that middle, that sweet spot where maybe you can make a mistake or two and still have time to recover from that mistake. Or you can nail it and have a great race too. So it's really it's a funny animal where there's a little margin for error, and you can still, like you said, take a little bit of a gamble.
Yeah, and I've gambled on it, and actually I've gambled on both sides where I've taken in too much and struggled. I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna lie. You can take in too much and you can struggle.
No.
And then I've been on the other side where I hadn't taken in enough and it affected me, but was able to recover, right?
Mhm.
Like was able to like get on that run
Yeah.
and actually, I think I talked about it with Oceanside. I think I took in 5 gels which is a lot.
Yeah. Right.
But I don't think I had enough on the bike, and it was cold in the beginning of the
Mhm.
bike, and I always struggle on a bike when it's cold, taking in enough nutrition. But yeah, I think that there is this little bit of I don't know, a nuanced gamble
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah. I
that
like that.
that
Yeah.
that occurs, even to the point of like breakfast even. I think
Mhm.
for a full Ironman, I mean, people that I know, I mean, they're dial in their breakfast, right? Like
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
and part of it's because you got that long swim.
Hmm.
You're not going to be able to eat for that hour and 15
Yeah.
minutes, and you might not be able to eat right before either. So, getting that nice solid breakfast. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people that don't eat breakfast before a 70.3,
Yeah.
and I do, and I have a planned breakfast routine for a 70.3. I don't, do you have a kind of go-to planned breakfast for?
No, but I am trying something new,
Oh,
and
okay.
I think I'm going to be trying something new at races going forward. Is I've started doing the applesauce
Oh,
packets.
interesting.
So you can go get that, just packets of applesauce. And I've seen a number of people who have talked about that, and then maybe something else, some carbohydrate like a bagel or something along that line. So. Uh, and I always like pancakes too, but something like that is what I'm starting to lean towards. Uh,
So applesauce, where did you get this idea? I haven't heard this yet.
oh, you haven't? Oh, yeah. No, I've read a number of race reports from some pro triathletes, and I hate this; it's anecdotal information, but it makes a lot of sense because it's already. We think about when we're the whole idea of nutrition plan is to get fuel to the muscles so the muscles can use that fuel and convert it and transform it over to mechanical energy and shorten the muscle and create a force and so forth. Well, that whole process starts with the digestion process, which starts even with chewing. And
Yep.
so I've read a number of people who started using applesauce, which is in essence taking a little bit out of the digestion process that you don't have to chew as much, and easy to get into gut and then digest from there. So no, that's been sort of a new thing. So even on my training days, when I get up, I usually don't like having breakfast before training. So I'll just grab, one of these packets. It looks like a gel, and it's just applesauce, and I down that before I go off on my run.
That's really interesting. So there's a few things in there. So I came across this just actually a couple of weeks ago. It was talking about the size of opening for your pyloric sphincter. So the pyloric sphincter is at the bottom of the stomach. So it's basically it goes from your stomach into your small intestine, and in your
Hmm.
small intestine is where you start to get absorption.
Okay.
And it said that just during the day, nothing gets past there that's bigger than a millimeter.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
And a millimeter is pretty
Yeah,
small, right? So, but I'm
that's
thinking
very small.
applesauce, the individual fibers of an apple, that's less
Yeah,
than a millimeter, so it'll
yeah,
get
yeah.
through. But anyways, I'll talk a little bit more about this because I was really interested in this 1 millimeter thing because people often eat things bigger than 1 millimeter,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
your
right,
stomach
right.
breaks them down, and if it doesn't break it down, this is even the cooler thing that I came up with was I didn't come up with this that I learned was that at night when you're sleeping, it opens bigger,
Mm,
and
hmm.
any remnants go through then. Oh, you know what? I think they were talking about bubble gum, like people
Oh,
eating
yeah,
eating bubble gum, and it'll sit in your stomach all day,
yeah, yeah.
right? But then at night it'll go through.
Oh, interesting.
And same with like when kids eat, like if a kid eats a penny,
Hmm.
right, it stays in the stomach until at night.
Mm,
At night everything opens and it
okay.
cleans basically. And
Hmm.
I thought that was pretty fascinating. But the millimeter thing was like, oh, I'm thinking about race nutrition now. Like,
Yeah.
why are gels so good? Well, they're obviously smaller than a
Yep.
millimeter,
Yep.
and I think applesauce falls right into that. So,
Yeah, and it falls in that category of real food,
yeah.
which is sort of a trend right now that people talk about. And I think this is a great point because the absorption of what you need in the body is not in the stomach.
Yeah.
It has the fuel has to get out of the stomach, so we call that gastric emptying, and has to get into the small intestines and the large intestines for everything to be absorbed in.
So my one question would be the amount of fructose.
I know, I know.
So supposedly you can only bring in 30 grams per hour
Hmm.
of fructose in your small intestine, and what doesn't get absorbed um, continues to move through you,
Hmm.
and can potentially bring water the wrong way in the
Yeah,
large intestine.
right.
So how much fructose are you taking? Because it's I think it's a lot in a I mean in
Yeah. Let me
in
see.
applesauce.
I didn't bring a packet up, here.
It's probably not going to tell you the amount of fructose, right?
Yeah.
So, carbohydrates, I got 43 grams of carbohydrates. I'm assuming it's mostly fructose. And
Uh-huh.
this is in 1 cup. That's actually probably about what you're bringing in, right?
No, no, it's maybe I'm looking at a thing online right now.
Okay.
It's 70 calories.
Okay. So you're
Uh,
probably a half cup.
yeah,
So a half cup, you're looking at 20 grams. You're fine. You're under that. You're under that.
yeah. It's saying 13 grams of sugars, which is probably, yeah,
Well, because it's gonna there'll be some fiber then
yeah,
making up the difference. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're under that number.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I know.
So
And
yeah,
then,
no,
when you said apples, I thought fructose and
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
and
and
sugars.
I've learned I like to have something in my stomach, not just sugars all day. And so that's why I've also, done some of the F-bomb type of nut butters type of thing. So
Yeah, and I think for training, that's a really,
yeah,
that's a good thing.
yeah.
But I don't know how in a 70.3 racing you'd want to do that.
Well, okay, so that's a good point because that's the other thing with nutrition. To have a nutrition plan, you've got to figure out the intensity
Yeah,
that you're going at. And again, that's that 70.3 is sort of that sweet spot. If you go really, if you hike a 70.3 or even that distance, you have lots of options for fuel
yeah.
because you have a lower intensity for the most part, and your body can digest things pretty readily. But if you're, in a sprint, you can't do a sprint longer, at that intensity for 70.3. But if you're at that high intensity, you have less options in terms of what you can get in the stomach and then into the GI system and then absorb.
So, it's interesting you say that because, looking at some of my past data and just other people's data, there's not that much difference in intensity in a sprint triathlon and a 70.3.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So
Pace
really,
wise or heart rate wise or
I'm just saying heart
yeah.
rate
Mhm.
wise. So for me in a sprint triathlon on the bike, I might have 160 heart rate,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe 165 at the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In a 70.3, 155.
Okay.
So as a percentage, it's not that much, different. And it makes sense, right? These are both
Yeah.
aerobic sports. Now, the sprint run often will be maybe, well, it's still probably only 10 beats higher, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
than my
Yeah.
7.3 run.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's a lot. Yeah.
yeah, well, it is and it's not,
Mm-hmm.
10 beats is, I mean, at that level, it's probably only like 6%
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
difference. And compared to resting,
Yeah. Right.
so and I don't know the answer, John,
Yeah.
but I still think when we've talked about this many times that a sprint triathlon is still long.
Well, but to your point, there are people who are fatigue resistant. And you think of even some great runners. I'm thinking off the top of my head, Sebastian Coe. I'm dating myself now.
Yeah.
Where if you looked at his pace, not heart rate, but his pace at for everything from 800 to a 5K to a 10K, he's pretty flat across that whole range of distances. But then you look at some other athletes, and they're much faster than him at the 800 and maybe the mile, but then they're slower than him at a 10K. And so he was more of a fatigue resistant type of runner. So maybe that's where you are, is that you just have the ability to race at a pretty narrow range of paces
Maybe, yeah, and maybe
over.
well, I think my problem is I'm not fast enough turning over. I think when I'm fit, my heart rate should be higher on a sprint triathlon.
Yeah,
I just can't turn my legs over fast enough. I don't have that gear, and it's probably because I
yeah.
don't train it enough. And it's the same like when we do bike racing. My max sprint is like 750 watts, and people laugh at that, and they're like,
Yeah,
700
yeah, yeah.
watts is
Right,
nothing.
right,
People are
right.
doing in the racing I'm doing, they're doing 1500 watts. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's just I don't have that. Like I just don't have that. And even how your Garmin watch or your watch tells you based off of your training, this should be your 5K time.
mm-hmm.
Mine always, like when I'm fit, it comes out and says, oh, 1630.
Oh,
Perfect.
nice. Yeah, that'd be great.
But I haven't touched this.
Yeah.
I think I one time, like 8 or 9 years ago, got in the 17s, like, but it was like
Oh,
1755 or something.
yeah.
And that was when I was running a lot of 5Ks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, in the last 2 or 3 years, in the 19s is probably where but my
Yeah.
watch always says
Yeah.
I should be in the 16s,
Yeah.
but I just don't have the turnover
Yeah. Right.
to do it. So maybe you're right. It's
Interesting.
it,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So maybe I can work at a higher intensity longer, and I don't know. But I think that's something that you need to recognize as an athlete going into a 70.3. You should know yourself
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
know, once again, we talked about this before, like planning a 70.3. The research that I see, or not even research, but more anecdote says, on the bike, 85% of your FTP should be your
Mm-hmm.
top end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somewhere between 80 and 85%.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can do that, maybe you can't.
Yeah.
And then that would, potentially factor into what you're going to eat.
Yeah. No, totally. It does, because that intensity influences how you are able to digest things. And so I'm a little different than you. I can, nail down my sprint heart rate is much higher than my 70.3 heart rate, and which is higher than my full heart rate. So but it's all dependent on your range of heart rate as well. And
Yeah.
so I want to back up here just a bit. Chip's got a comment here. Why do you struggle if you've taken too much food, I'll say, or fuel? And here's the trick: is the idea of taking the nutrition in during an event is that you don't have enough nutrition in your body right now. Now, for a sprint, you probably do, because we've got fuel stored in our fats, our subcutaneous fat, and we've got fuel stored in the muscle in terms of muscle glycogen. We've got fuel in the liver glycogen, but there's limited capacities of the glycogen. And so the whole idea of a nutrition plan is to prevent that depletion of really carbohydrates more so than fats, because we're never going to get rid of our fat. And the trick is to not take in too much, because one, if you're taking in too much, you're just carrying extra weight. That's one negative. But then it also has to do with what we're talking about with emptying the stomach. And if we can't get a fast enough gastric emptying rate, then all that stuff is just going to be in the stomach, which could lead to cramping, bloating feeling that people talk about in races.
Or in the longer race is basically, like we were already saying, that you've saturated your transporters. Your transporters are things that bring sugars across the small intestine into the bloodstream,
Mm-hmm.
and they saturate. And once again, once they become saturated, then things just pass through. And to make a long story short, they get into your large intestine relatively quickly because there's very little fiber here.
Yeah.
And it'll suck water out and give you diarrhea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once again, in a short race, that's not going to happen. You don't have enough
Yeah.
transport time. But in a 5-hour race,
Yeah.
especially if you eat too much too early,
Mm-hmm.
that can potentially happen.
Yeah.
So that would be that, and that's been my experience when I was experimenting. And it was one race in particular. I can remember, like, oh, I'm gonna try and max out, like, see if I can do 100 grams per hour on the bike,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't. Like,
Yeah. Right.
I tried, and halfway through the run, it was porta potty
Yeah.
time. Not that that was for sure cause effect, but I kind of felt like it was. And then I did feel kind of bloated
Mm-hmm.
on the bike, and like a little burpy,
Yeah.
not good, like just not
Mm-hmm.
good.
Well, and this is the issue with the nutrition plan is, one, you want to make sure you've got enough fuel to finish, but then not have those GI problems. And, there's been plenty of survey data out there in terms of the percentage of athletes who have GI problems during Ironman or 70.3. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's a phenomenal rate of, it's the majority of athletes are going to have some type of GI problem, which leads to they're not matching the intensity of their race with the right nutrition plan.
Yeah, and also figuring out your caloric expenditure and your caloric need,
Yeah.
right? Well, I guess that those are the same things. So I don't know what you teach your students, John, but I teach my students that in general, this is all averages. The average sized athlete working at pretty average intensity for a race
Mm-hmm.
will utilize about 100 calories every 10 minutes. I just try to
Okay.
make it as simple as possible for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in an hour, it's 600 calories
Mm,
that you're using. And once again, and I would kind of say that's about probably 70.3 pace, or maybe Olympic distance pace. When you're going longer and slower in an Ironman, it's probably less.
mm-hmm.
Once again, it's just a rule of thumb because they always struggle with just wrapping their head around it. And so just once again, a rule of thumb is
Yeah.
every 10 minutes, you're going to go through about 100 calories.
Mm.
And the problem, and you're already alluding to this, the problem is that you can't bring in 600 calories an hour.
That's right.
So you're in debt,
Yeah.
and you're in debt, especially if you're working hard, where you really are utilizing more carbohydrates than you are fat.
Mm-hmm.
Even at 85%, you're probably utilizing some fat, but you're
Mm-hmm.
probably utilizing more carbohydrates. So then the answer to not the answer, the part of the solution ends up being back to what you said also about storage,
Mm-hmm.
right? So John, how many calories can you pre-store of carbohydrate, like before the race?
Well, that is, I don't know for myself.
But in general, what do
Yeah,
you
that's
think?
hard to measure, but it is dependent on your fitness level, and you can do some things to try to store more carbohydrate, especially. You can store a lot of fat.
And I got no problem with
That's
that.
that's not hard. But I mean, that's the whole idea behind carbo loading is you're able to really go above and beyond in terms of what carbohydrate is in the muscle, and in the liver. But it's not that much. Like maybe, again, we're talking you're going to run out of carbohydrate in about 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's not going to be
So
that much
it's like
longer.
12 to 1500 calories is kind of what people are estimating, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're right. In 2 hours, if you're going at 10 minutes or 100 per 10 minutes, you're
Mhm.
getting close to where you're going to run out.
Yeah. And the key with the reason why running out of carbohydrate is so detrimental to performance is that you can't use fats without having some carbohydrates being used.
Yeah.
So we always say fats burn in the carbohydrate flame. You need a little bit of carbohydrate to keep the fat being used. And if you don't have enough carbohydrate, you're not going to be able to use the fat. So even, when we talk about low carb, high fat, that is just a matter of having the right amount of carbohydrate. You're always going to have carbohydrates. You're still going to have the right amount of carbohydrates in that type of diet to use the fat. And so sometimes what that means is your intensity goes down, or you need to train your body so you're still using very few carbohydrates, but you still need them.
Yeah, no, it is exactly. And this is tough stuff to
Yeah.
really wrap your head around. And then the other thing I think that is interesting is if you have both fat, you always have fat available, right? But if
Yeah.
you have both fat and carbohydrates, your body's going to use carbohydrates first,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's going to be preferential. It's there. We're going to use it.
It's just easy.
It's easy.
Mhm.
Once again, yeah, the metabolism with carbohydrates is just, it's easier. It's less steps
Mhm.
in the metabolic pathways. And so yeah, you're going to use it first, especially when your intensity is race intensity.
Mhm. So yeah, let's talk a couple of numbers because
Yeah.
just because they're out there and these are numbers that people hear and you're talking about calories per hour and the recommendations that we've both seen have ranged quite a bit. I mean, what are you seeing now with the literature or even with athletes doing
240 grams minimum, or sorry,
calories? Yeah.
calories minimum per hour, with upwards now of like 400, if trained right.
Yeah.
Um, but still, that still leaves you with 200 calories below what you need.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is interesting. So, there's some stuff with Christian Blumenfeld talking about this, and they're 400 per. They're bringing in 400 per hour, but the intensity they're racing at,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's even more that they're burning.
Right.
Right? We can't race. Like, you and I can't race at that intensity,
Right.
and because it is, commensurate with the pace you're going or the power you're putting out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I think the upper limit right now for most is 400 calories per hour.
Yeah, I love it. And then the other number that goes along with that is how many grams of carbohydrate to take in per hour, and that recommendation will range anywhere from 40 to maybe 60, and I've even seen 90 to 100 grams per hour, which is a lot of carbohydrate to take in.
And I think if done right, I think 90 is a number you could hit.
Hmm.
Especially if you do 60 grams of sucrose and is it glucose? Glucose and glucose and 30 grams of fructose.
Yeah, and
That's what the research is showing at least.
yeah, and I'll tell you that the early recommendation was 60 grams per hour, and the reason for that 60 gram per hour is because that was the rate that the liver was able to release carbohydrate into the bloodstream, and then it goes to the muscle, and then it's used in the muscle. And so, we always talk about, where carbohydrate is. It's always this interplay between what's in the muscle, where it's going to be used, what's in the bloodstream, which represents what's being released from the liver to get to the muscle. And so, you and I, we've talked about measuring blood glucose, and that's the idea, is that you're measuring what's being transported, in essence, to the muscle. And the liver reduced, in essence, the research that was done, they were getting to a number about 60 grams per hour of carbohydrate were being released by the liver. And so the idea then is, well, if that's what's being released by the liver, you got to take in that much to prevent the liver from becoming depleted of glycogen, of
Yeah.
glucose, carbohydrate, glycogen. In essence, it's all the same.
So there's that, and then going back to the transporters,
Yeah.
the transporter for glucose is basically saturated at 60 grams per
Right.
hour,
Right.
and the fructose transporters are 30 grams per hour.
Yeah.
In general, once again, these are averages.
I know, and I'm glad you caught that, because that we're throwing out these numbers, but that may not be for me. That may not be for you. You gotta play around, and this is the tough thing, is you do need to experiment and see what works and what doesn't work, and it's so complicated because the amount of fuel you're going to need is going to be dependent on so many different things. And we were talking about rain today, cooler temperature, humidity.
So then, it's I'm so glad you brought it, because that was going to be my next point, right? Is environmental conditions
Yeah.
affect this.
Hmm.
So once again, if it's super hot, you actually can absorb less, because more of your blood is going towards your skin for cooling, less of it's going towards your gut, basically, to bring these nutrients across and bring them into the bloodstream. So that there's that. Then also, if it's really cold and you're trying to generate more heat,
Hmm.
that can affect this deleteriously as well.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's a chess match, of trying to figure this out. And we've talked a little bit about this before too. The ambient temperature and humidity will also play a huge role in the amount of fluid you're bringing along with this.
Yeah.
And you could be like, oh, I want to only do this all with fluids.
Hmm.
Okay, and you can, until it gets really a colder race.
Hmm. Hmm.
And like maybe you're not sweating it. You're not like you're you know what I mean. Like you're not giving off very much water, and so now your one bottle, you could do this off of one bottle, but it might not taste very good.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So I think that definitely adds a piece to it.
Well, and you're right, and the environmental conditions are huge, not only because of intensity of the course, going uphill, downhill, or what have you, or wind, or air temperature, and humidity, but it's also oh, I'm sorry, I just had a nutrition brain pause there.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So yeah,
It's
so
Friday
that's.
night. You're allowed a few brain pauses.
I know, man. This is yeah. So I just totally forgot where I got off track on that, and now all of a sudden I can't get it back. So
It's okay. It's okay. I think we get the point though, that this is tough stuff. And I always encourage people, like, and we've talked about this before, to practice. It can be expensive to go for a practice ride with your
yeah.
sports nutrition you're going to do,
Hmm.
but at least once or twice, go for a bike ride at the intensity you're going to ride in a race. Maybe if it's not the full 3 hours or whatever, but some of it, and see, can you actually bring in what you plan to bring in, and how do you feel?
Hmm.
Right. Um It's hard to do. So,
Yeah, and that made me think of what I was trying to say. It's that those conditions change the blood flow and where blood is going, and that blood flow to the gut is important in one sense to get things out of the digestive system or to the muscle, but you also don't want to draw too much fluid into the gut either. And so it's again this delicate balance of trying to get this just right.
so then, John, let's talk about if you were to do a 70.3, I don't know, this weekend
Hmm.
in, I don't know, not crazy hot. So let's just say average, like 80 degrees,
Yeah.
medium type humidity. Let's start thinking about the fall races that people are getting ready for.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what would be your plan?
Well, one, check what the race is handing out. Check the frequency of the aid stations to know what you can get, what you can't get, or what type of gap you're going to have to not have anything that you can pick up. So that's level one. But then uh, for a race, if it's again a hilly race, I want to carry as little as possible on the bike, if that makes sense. Uh, or I want to time picking up bottles or dropping bottles off based upon maybe some course dynamics. So I try to carry as little as possible. I have one bottle, my between the Earl Bar bottle that is only water. And then my other bottles may either be water or maybe some concoction of something to use. And then
Some concoction now. John, you're teasing us here. What's the John Mercer special
yeah, no,
concoction?
well, it's not I miss a lot on nutrition plans. So this is, an exercise that maybe don't try what I try to do. But, more recently I've been using the S Fuels, which is, moves more towards a different, not necessarily carbohydrate drink, and add some electrolytes to that. That's where I've been going. And then for fuel, I've tried a wide variety of things.
But,
So,
but, but without product naming,
mhm.
which you can do. I mean, obviously we don't care.
Yeah, yeah,
We're sponsored by everybody. I mean, I'm
yeah,
just
right, right.
throwing money at our podcast. But how do you like shoot for grams per hour?
It's a little bit of grams per hour and a little bit about calories as
Or
well.
same there, or
Yeah,
calories per hour? I
that's
mean, do
right.
you
I
have
mean,
a
they go hand in hand, but at the same time, you're right. It's a little bit of I probably have more of a blend of carbohydrates and fats than maybe some people do, and still, calories per hour. I'm probably more focused on carbohydrates per hour than I am calories per hour.
so then how many carbohydrates per hour are you personally like gunning for on the bike and on the run?
I do shoot for 50 to 60.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you successful? Like getting 50 and 60 in, or how has that been for you?
For for sprints, Olympics, and 70.3s, I have very few nutrition issues. And any nutrition issues I've had on the 70.3, well, there's been a couple of races that have been tougher. I've been able to work through, but for getting it right for an Ironman, I have not. I get maybe 1 in 3 races right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I kind of want to talk about 70.3 because I think
Yeah,
we can get 70.3s right.
yeah.
And once again, there's a little bit more nuance and
Mm-hmm.
to it. Whereas you're right. I think with the Ironman, I mean, it's and maybe because we do so few of them. I mean, obviously you've done a lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
but really, like, it's a long time between. What does it say? A long time between drinks and between
Yeah,
sips.
yeah, yeah,
And but I do think it's interesting in you are at that number. You're at the 60
yeah.
number.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that in a 70.3, do you feel like nearing the end of the race, you still feel like you have good energy?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is if I can avoid nausea, then I feel like I can race well.
Yeah.
And that's my dilemma is trying to take in the right amount that's not going to give me nausea. Uh, and I have
That's a
missed
delicate
taking too few.
balance.
It is because I have missed taking too few calories and carbohydrates in, and yeah, you suffer a little bit at the end of the run, but I'll lean more towards that end versus taking in more and running the risk of having GI problems.
Yeah. I find it interesting, like in a 70.3, especially, if I get to, for example, like mile 9, mile 8, mile 9, I'm starting to feel it coming on.
Hmm.
At least at Ironman races, and I hate to say this, but man, there's nothing like a Red Bull at that point.
Yeah, yeah,
And you get, I mean, that's some mainlining sugar,
yeah.
along with some caffeine.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people are the same with Coca-Cola. I'm the same with
Hmm.
Coca-Cola too.
Hmm.
There's a lot of calories that are rapidly available
Yep,
when you start drinking things like that.
yep.
And I know that the research says, that's too high of sugar content for the amount of water.
Hmm.
But when you only have maybe 30 minutes left in your race,
Yeah, right.
and your GI system's been okay till then, I'm fine with
Hmm.
bringing that stuff in there. I don't know about you, but that's
Yeah,
not.
it can be the nectar of the gods at that point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and I would encourage people, if you're starting to feel that, or even if you're not, and you only have less than a half hour to go,
yeah.
it's not going to, in a half hour, that's not going to go all the way down into your large intestine and cause you to have diarrhea,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so if you're thinking you're a little low on your calories, I mean, it's a thing, like even like pro cyclists, like you see them even in the Tour de France, cans of Coke as they're going,
Hmm.
because it's quick fuel. I think we talked about this before, but last year I was wearing that continuous glucose monitor for a while,
Yeah.
and my blood sugar when I did a can of Coke went from like 90 to 180 in about 12 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And that while riding.
Yeah.
And if you think about, like, you think about how quickly that can happen,
Hmm.
it can turn your bike ride around really fast, or it can turn your race around really fast, but
Hmm.
can be dangerous taken too early, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the recommendations I've heard too, is don't take it too soon,
Yep.
because it is packed, but they can cause some problems.
It was interesting, at the last Ironman we did, they had it on the bike, Coke.
Yeah,
I'm like, man, that's early, but
yeah,
I
it
I
is.
drank one.
Yeah.
The little anecdote story, I don't know if I told this story before, but we were going up the first hill. I can't remember, not the first hill, the first steep hill,
Which
gun
race?
gunlock.
Okay.
And
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
the guy gives me a Coke. I grab a Coke, and they had really thin nozzles on the top of them. I don't know if you had one at that race. So I squirted it in my mouth and
Yeah.
got quite a bit in, squirted a little bit more in, and then I'm like, I wasn't thinking, and I just threw it. I'm like, because I saw like the end of the trash was coming.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to hold this can of Coke for the
Oh,
next.
great,
So
great.
I throw it, and there's a volunteer standing by the garbage. Oh my gosh, the thing exploded.
It's just.
All over him. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I would never. I just,
That's great.
I felt, I felt so bad. I
Yeah.
sprayed this guy with Coke. Oh gosh.
Oh, that's funny. Little
Uh,
rocket ship.
it was like a little rocket ship, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would never, like. And it's funny, like, how the things we do during a race that we
Yeah.
would never,
Yeah.
we would never do.
All right, well, let me flip the table on you now,
Okay.
and you're going to do a 70.3 this weekend.
Yep.
What are you doing for your nutrition plan? Where do you approach
Okay.
it?
So I have breakfast. So I want to, and it's going to be carb centric breakfast. I usually do sweet potatoes, maybe a little bit of fat too, especially depending on how many hours before.
Hmm.
So maybe like some peanut butter, um, maybe some watermelon. I like watermelon, for a variety of reasons, but then I try not to have much between then and right before the race, because I think I've talked to this before. I have rebound hypoglycemia, and when it hits me really bad. And we can talk about that more in another time. But if I basically have sugar within like 15 or 20 minutes of exercising, I get a rebound where I get
Mm.
actually go hypoglycemic.
Hmm.
One of the reasons I wore that glucose monitor was to try and
Yeah.
figure this out. But if I have it right before, I'm good. And so I actually have a gel. I try and have a gel like 5 minutes before I go in the water.
Okay.
And when I do that, I'm good.
Yeah.
It was interesting when we raced last weekend, and I did the swim in Calgary. Um, I had my gel 5 minutes before, and they delayed the start because of fog,
Mm.
and they delayed it about 10, 12 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. That's a long
And I was
time.
getting really nervous. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like I timed this wrong. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
because they were announcing it. Hey, we're 5 minutes to the start, and I knew where I was going to line up and everything,
Yeah.
and then we're all lined up and like, hey, we're going to delay the start because we can't see the first buoy.
Mm-hmm.
And oh man, I got so nervous that I was going to bonk in that, in the swim, because that's what happens. Like I just feel like
And cramp up.
my blood sugar goes down to in the
Yeah.
70s.
Oh, wow.
And it happens relatively quickly. So it didn't happen that I'm aware of. So that was good. So then, obviously get onto the bike. So because you can't, I'm not bringing anything during the swim.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the bike, I really do shoot for 75 grams
Okay.
of carbs. So I do it with a combination of drinking and I've been using the Gatorade Endurance Chews,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which are no longer available. So probably not a good thing to tell people, because I got 2 cases and
Oh, wow.
or 2 boxes left. So I got a couple more years worth, but and so I do a combination of those 2 things. And I really try, and once again, it depends like how many of those I have versus the drink. And I use Morton, I used last time, but I use Gatorade Endurance. Literally, honestly, I use anything. I don't care.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as it has a mix of glucose and fructose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if it's cooler,
Mm-hmm.
right, I'm gonna have less in the water bottle
Yeah.
or in my bottle. If it's warmer, I'll have more.
Yeah.
And just there's a balance I'm playing there.
Mm-hmm.
But really the number is 75 that I try and hit.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the run, I try now to have a gel, and I on courses Morton gel. So I don't bring my own. I just use theirs, and I've been trying every 3 aid stations.
Okay.
So it's usually every 3 miles, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
about what it is. So
Mm-hmm.
it's 3, 6, 9.
Yeah.
So just I try for 3 during a race, and I might need 1 more between
Mm-hmm.
9 and the finish.
Yeah.
And then once again, the last 5 miles, if I'm still feeling okay, then I'll do the Red Bull or
Mm-hmm.
Coke. I don't drink any. I try not to drink anything other than water
Okay.
on the run. Mostly because I spill a lot.
Yeah, right, right.
I'd rather eat it, like, because
Yeah.
you get a cup and you get Gatorade and it
Yeah.
goes all down, and your hands are all
Yeah.
sticky,
Yeah.
and
Right.
it just bothers me
Yeah,
psychologically.
right, right.
Right, I think I'd be fine drinking something like that, but once you get later in the race,
Yeah.
the last half hour, I don't care. Just
Yeah.
I'm a mess by then
Yeah.
anyways. So I'm probably not hitting the calories needed on the run,
Yeah.
but I'm hoping I front-ended it enough
Mm-hmm.
on the bike.
Right, right. And then you
But I
get
do
through it.
struggle. I struggle if it's cold. I
Mm-hmm.
struggle eating enough if it's cold. I definitely struggle drinking enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also can struggle on the bike if there's a lot happening,
Mm.
right? So we've talked about race dynamics before.
Yep.
If there's a lot of people on the course, you're passing a lot of people, or you're being passed and then you
Mm-hmm.
repass, or there's just dynamics of the race that happen. Or if I get into a group that's going the pace I want to go, and
Mm-hmm.
once again, legally drafting,
Yep.
I might forget to eat because I'm
I
really concentrating on,
That's a
hey, I
great
want to
point.
keep that 6 bike lengths,
Yeah, right.
right? And I'm super focused on not losing that, right?
Yeah.
Because you drop back to 8 bike lengths, you lose the draft.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go in because you don't want to break the rules.
Yep.
And so oftentimes I'll like, oh my gosh, it's been like a half hour like this. I haven't eaten.
Right.
I'm
Right.
just so focused.
Mm-hmm.
And then the course plays a role with that too. So a course like Oceanside, which we both raced, it's really technical, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the roads are rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've got to be watching out for
That's right.
potholes and
Yeah.
little turns. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it was just a dead flat pancake good road, eating is a lot easier.
Yeah. Right.
So that does play a role in it as well. I'm not someone that sets an alarm to it.
Yeah.
I know people do.
Mm-hmm.
But my goal is by the end, I've kind of like mapped it all out, how many of those chews I want,
Yeah.
and I want to have none left.
Right. Right.
And I kind of look down like halfway, because I have I look at how far I've gone. So if I'm like 26, 27 miles in, I look down, how am I doing? Maybe I need to up it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of my
I love it.
That's
That's
that's how
great.
I approach it.
No, I think that's a great point in terms of knowing when to eat during a race. And you do get distracted by the race dynamics or what's going on. And I think that's important for people to remember is that you don't want to take these big bolus. You don't want to take, oh, I'm going to just drink this whole bottle now, and
Yeah.
that will carry me for an hour. It's not like that. In fact, this is a limitation of a lot of the research is that for a while they were doing just that, is that they were having their subjects drink as much as they can, in a very short period of time because they could quantify that and then exercise. But taking, a big drink, a bottle, and then exercise for an hour is going to give a different amount of gastric volume at any moment in time than if you take a quarter of the bottle and another quarter of the bottle, another quarter of the bottle, and so forth. And that gastric volume ends up really influencing the gastric emptying. So this is a real issue. So that's
You know,
great.
and it's real life. Like we're talking about, these are real dynamics.
Yeah,
And the other issue is if you're in a crowd of people on your bike, you shouldn't eat.
yeah, right.
You need to be head on a swivel,
Yeah.
hands on the brakes. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
you got to be careful. I mean, we've talked about it before. It's more of an aid station thing where people crashing around aid
Yeah,
stations.
that's right.
And part of it is people are eating during the aid station. So they're
Mhm.
grabbing a gel and they're eating it because they want to throw it away before the trash ends.
Yeah.
And like to me, that's a disaster waiting to
Aid
happen.
stations, yeah.
I will
Aid,
never eat during an aid station. Like I'll
yeah, aid.
grab it, and like, well, I guess I drank the Coke, but
Mhm.
I really want to get in and out of that aid station safely. I definitely wouldn't eat a gel, like open up a gel and eat
Yeah.
it during the aid station. I want to
Mhm.
get my stuff and get out of there
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
the bike. Because we've talked about it before. I mean, how many times have you seen people crashing in aid
Oh,
stations?
I know. They're so dangerous, and they're dangerous going through them. They're dangerous if you do stop and then you're going to start riding again. You really have to treat aid station with a high level of risk and be aware. And you can't always rely on someone else doing something that's predictable. If you go stop and use the bathroom at an aid station, when you come out and you get on your bike, you better make sure that you're pulling into traffic the right way.
The a note to all race directors that listen to our podcast.
Yeah,
Okay? Put the aid stations on uphills.
yeah, yeah, right.
It's simple. Like your aid station should not be on a 1 or 2 degree down or
No,
even a flat.
yeah,
Good triathletes are going 25 to 30 miles an hour on a flat.
yeah.
You can't. The odds of someone having a crash are so much greater.
Hmm.
A little 2 or 3% incline,
Yeah,
it's going to slow everybody down.
that's right. That's perfect.
And it blows my mind when that happens, when you see an aid station on a even a slight downhill. I just don't
Well,
understand that. It's because it's not like if there's a slight downhill, there's gonna be a slight uphill within the next couple of miles.
and the odds of getting a bottle when you're going through the aid station fast are reduced.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing is one, slow down, get your bottle. That's the most important thing. But then two, you've got to. I never like being behind anyone who's trying to get a bottle because
Yeah.
if they miss and
It's in
that
your
bottle
wheel.
ends up in the ground right in front of me, that can be a disaster. So and it's hard to avoid at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So yeah, race directors, fix that problem,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. We're talking through this, and you just when you're going through your plan, I was thinking back to the old days when I was younger, and back then I would just take a power bar. I don't know if you remember what power bars
Oh
are.
yeah, I love power bars.
What we used to do is just unwrap them and we'd wrap them to the stem of the bike. And then as we were biking, we'd just rip it off a piece and eat it. So we wouldn't even have, because we didn't have bento boxes, we didn't have any storage on our bikes back then. It was all, just I'll wrap this on the stem of the bike and just start peeling it off and eating it along the way.
So what's your record for the number of power bars eaten during an event?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, I would.
It's hard to eat those things.
Back then we didn't have 78.3s, but we did have some long course that we would do. And I really would only put 2 bars on
Yeah,
a stem at the most. Well, that's how much, you can't fit too much on there,
because there
but
was no gels, right? Like gels are
no
relative.
gels. Gels didn't exist.
Yeah.
No, it was water bottles and power bar. Power bar was really the first thing I saw in terms of a nutrition to take during a race, which was interesting. So.
It is interesting how things have evolved
Evolved,
in
yeah.
that space. So back in my old orienteering days, I used to eat, well, they don't have them in the United States, but Canadian Smarties. You know what Smarties are,
Hmm.
because you've been to Canada enough.
Yeah,
But they're
yeah,
like they're like M&Ms,
yeah.
and they come in like little boxes. And I can remember one time in the rain, I was racing, and was wearing like a little light rain jacket, and
Yeah.
hearing you go like a little metronome for me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's perfect. I got my nutrition. Or I'd keep them in my sock even. I had a little
Yeah,
box in my sock
yeah.
as I run. But there, yeah, there was no, wasn't
No,
a free
no.
power bar. It was,
Wow.
well, you got candy.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and even that, people weren't using that much candy. And I
yeah.
was like, you're out here for maybe an hour and a half or so.
Mm,
And I was doing a degree at the time in kinesiology in Canada. And
mm-hmm,
first the sports nutrition class I went to, I'm like, oh yeah, I should be
mm-hmm.
having calories
Yeah,
as I'm going. That's a good idea.
yeah, yeah. Right, right. You would think that would have come up sooner, but back in the early 1900s, I mean, even running a marathon, and I know we've mentioned this before. The goal was to not take anything in, for the elite marathoners, and not even water. And so, that all changed in a pretty short period of time, back in the 70s and then 80s. So,
Well, I think if people weren't taking in water in triathlon, they'd be dead.
or you'd be stopping and you just would not be completing. You would, yeah,
When we talked about a little bit about this, and it's the nature of triathlon, right? Like
yeah.
it's interesting. Like we would love a cooler triathlon for the most part. Like
Oh,
everyone would
yeah, yeah,
like it, but it doesn't ever work out for the most part. It doesn't work out. Well, good luck, Julie, this weekend in Alaska, because
yeah,
it's going to be cold. But to have warm enough water to swim in,
yeah,
it's got to be somewhat warm outside,
yeah, yeah. Right.
right? Because we talked about this before, like marathons, they run them in the 50s, and that's like
Yeah,
perfect
yeah.
temperature.
Spring or fall. Yeah,
You're very rarely going to find a
yeah.
long course triathlon
Mhm, yeah.
or that you can run at that kind of temperature, because the water's just going to be too darn cold.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
speaking of cold water, the Morro Bay triathlon was announced this week. Did you happen to see the water temperature?
no, no. What is it?
They're predicting water temperatures at 51 degrees.
Oh, sweet.
That's
That's
the coldest I've ever seen
that's
on
pretty
the
cold.
Ironman website, where
Yeah,
they estimated water temperature.
yeah. That's almost too cold. There is a lower limit. I'm drawing a blank on it off the top of my head, that you don't want people doing a triathlon in, and that's getting there. Yeah, I would definitely wear my neoprene cap for something like that. Anything under 60, I wear a neoprene cap.
So I swam near there last year, no, 2 years ago, and it was, I think, at the beginning of June, just in a normal wetsuit, not my thermal wetsuit, and I got kind of hypothermic in
Yeah, yeah.
about 30 minutes. And
It's cold.
that was the height of the day.
Mm-hmm.
You actually had sun. The sun will warm up that little bit, that top layer, but this is going to be early in the morning. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually heading that way in a couple weeks, and I'm going to go into that bay and with my thermal wetsuit and have a little test. Have a
Oh,
little.
I love it. Well, I was in a different set of water conditions doing the New York City try, swimming in the Hudson.
What was the temperature?
You
And I
know
have no idea
what?
what temperatures are in rivers over there.
It warmed up, and it was no non-wetsuit legal race, so I think it got just over 78, and so it was perfect. So it was a
Perfect for
longish,
you.
yeah, it was a longish swim, and so that actually worked more to my strength. But yeah, it's Hudson River, and anyone who's lived on the East Coast has heard a lot of stories about the pollution in the Hudson, and yeah, it's not a clean river, but it's actually the cleanest it's been in a long time, and I have swam in worse.
So let me ask you a question. Is it a normal thing for people to swim there, or was it just because of the race?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, they do swims there. They'll do
okay.
swims around, out in more off Manhattan, between Battery Park and Statue of Liberty.
Okay.
And yeah, but back in the day when we did the New York City Tri, back when I used to do it, it was out at Coney Island, which was out more in the ocean. And it's just that I think this is the first time I swam in the Hudson off Manhattan. So that was
Okay.
neat. It was funny. I jumped in, and of course it's salty, but I hadn't thought that the water was going to be salty. It just didn't process in my brain, and you don't smell it. You don't smell the salt, in Manhattan. And so I jumped in the water. I was like, oh yeah, the salt water. That's actually really nice too. So
Oh, that's so fun. So the tide was going with you because you said you were
yeah,
swimming
yeah, yeah.
river, but down tide, right?
It was upstream, but it was with the tide coming in, and so there was that what they said some tide ate it. I don't know how much there really was at the end of the day, but
Well, because if they're doing opposites, right? If the river's going one way and the tide's going the other way, it can't have a lot of movement.
yeah,
You
but they were um, tracking this because actually we got delayed as well.
Okay.
Probably it was about 20 minutes because the tide came in faster than they had expected for whatever reason, and it loosened up the exit barge, and
Oh,
so there was nowhere to get out, and so they had to get that all fixed, and then they got it ready.
oh,
And
it
then
was move. So it was moving then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was noticeable. So
Interesting.
in terms of at that time. But then they announced, they said, oh, it's going to peak at 6:30 and then it will be less than that. And they were really only getting started about 6:30. So I don't know how much ate of the tide that any of us had, but that's right. And then speaking of nutrition on that one, it was a hot day. So I only had one bottle between my aero bars and it was just water. And I didn't really even take any in that type of event, I'm just taking it in my mouth. I'm spraying it all out, trying to keep cool as possible.
You spraying it over yourself?
Oh
Over,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. So big training plans this weekend?
I'm gonna go meet a group of our local athletes up on the northwest side of town, so I'll have to get to bed early and get up early. It's
Oh, tomorrow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a group going from Centennial Hills High School, so I'll go meet
Oh,
up with
Centennial
them.
High School. Oh, you're coming to my side
Oh,
of town.
Centennial, yeah, Centennial. Yeah, yeah, I will be.
All right. Oh,
How
have
about you?
fun up here. We'll swim tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm going to try and get I don't haven't I have a lever system. I just got it and I haven't opened
Oh,
it up yet, so I might test that out tomorrow. And then
oh, cool.
I'm gonna try a little ride on Sunday and see how that goes. And
Good, good,
getting back at it. And so yeah, hopefully it'll be a good weekend, good weekend of training. I'm hoping the clouds stay.
good. Yeah, I know. That's right. Just keep the temps down, but have the clouds out. That'll be nice.
All right, John. Well, hey, have a great weekend and we'll talk next week.
All right, sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks.